I always felt certain parts of me were really important, my spirituality, my creativity, who I was. But then I would kind of go up against this feeling of like, ooh, I don't know if that makes people comfortable around me, or if I don't know if that's like socially acceptable, if that's going to make me money, or all these like stories of like all the programming got in. Like, I feel like I'm very open and I'm very empathetic. I'm very like, I also read like impressionable. So I feel like it's sometimes I was like, I feel really good about myself, but then I go out in the world and I'm just second guessing, I'm doubting, there's so much noise. So this journey of being authentic, whatever this means to you, to me just felt like, getting to quiet down some of that noise and going on this journey of building a relationship with getting to know you, yourself, first and foremost. Like, who am I? What are my strengths, my weaknesses, my opportunities, my obstacles, my superpowers, my shadow, and really like knowing yourself inside and out so no one can tell you anything that you're not, good or bad.
Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead-generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. Today on the podcast, we have Madi Murphy of CosmicRX Radio. She is a dear friend and a client. And this episode, I'm asking her questions that are kind of leading us to a topic that I think is really important as podcasters. And that is how we can be authentic and how that allows us to grow our business, grow our podcast, and create deeper connections with our audience. If you're struggling with being more authentic and more open with your podcast content, then this is going to be a really good conversation for you. We also talk about the business growth that Madi has seen due to her authenticity and knowing herself and understanding how it is that she works best. So she's able to get people on the phone with her or in her group programs easily. And when they get there, they are excited and in alignment with the kinds of people that she already wants to attract. So get ready for an incredible episode and join me in welcoming Madi to the podcast. Hello, Madi. I'm so excited. I literally say that every time, but I'm so excited that you're here and that we get to talk about your podcast. And yes, so if you could just start by telling everyone who you are, what you do, what your podcast is, and what it is about.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I'm loving the Virgo to Virgo love. And, I'm thinking ahead of myself, but I'm so grateful to you because obviously why I'm on this podcast is I would not have a podcast if it was not for you. I would have had like 2 episodes and it would just be sitting out in some boneyard. So my name is Madi Murphy. I call myself a cosmic consultant because I basically do a whole host of things. I have my own business, the CosmicRX, which is a spiritual wellness now becoming tech brand. And I do private work, group work. That's all about getting in touch with your power. We use astrology, we use psychology, we use spirituality. We use whatever it takes to help you feel like your highest and hottest bad bitch self. And I am the host of CosmicRX Radio, which is when I talk about what I do, that's my favorite thing. It's my favorite thing. I love everything else I do, but the podcast was such an activator for me. And it was like the exact thing I needed to kind of get my vibe out in the world in the way I wanted to. So yeah, that's my deal.
I'm curious because I am an external processor. It takes me forever to try to write something out and I need to like vocalize it. Do you feel similar in that way?
100%. So we're both Virgos, so we're perfectionists. So when I have to write something, I don't care if it's an Instagram post or an article for Vogue or a birthday card. Your girl is overthinking it, rewriting it, have the thesaurus out, looking up, okay, how can I say this word better? And then it's like 4 days later and I'm just still looking at the same thing. And Virgos, we make better editors. I'm sorry, it's not an astrology episode, but it's what I do. So I have to bring it up.
Yes, let's do it.
We don't do well with like blank page energy. We'd rather have an idea and then like fix it, make it more magical, make it better. And we're really proud of our work and our words. So something like writing, for years. I was like, this is the time. I'm going to be authentic. I'm going to share my story on Instagram. I'm going to have a blog. Nope. I would like do it. And I would just like sit there and overthinking it, analysis paralysis. But where I find that external processing, I love conversation. I love talking. I constantly am teaching myself things when I'm talking. I'll have an aha or a download. I'm like, oh yeah, like I didn't even plan to do that idea, but I just said it out loud. And now I'm like writing it down. I'm like, note to self. That was the solution to the problem I was looking for. And I'm a little bit messy and I like to kind of just do things from a really real, raw place, which I feel like just translates better to a podcast versus like going through my weird rambling run-on sentences and poor grammar online. It's like easier to be a little bit raw and real in this format.
Yeah, because you don't feel like you have to continuously edit yourself. And thankfully for you, you have someone to edit your podcast, right? I cannot listen to my podcast. Like, I absolutely refuse to. No. I cannot re-listen to any guest episodes I'm on. Nope.
No, I've never listened to a podcast of mine. That is actually a weird kind of thing. I've always been a little bit like scared to admit, but I'm like, I have never. I listened to like a clip. Someone played it for me, but I do not. I like to just get it out there and then be done because I have the overthinking and the self-critical and like, ooh. And I'd rather just be in that flow state. And also just the tone of voice of talking. Like sometimes writing, I'm very sarcastic. I can be a little like raunchy sometimes. And sometimes just reading that, it's too much. It's like, what is wrong with this person?
Yes. Yeah, all the yes. It's tone, right? Especially for external processors. Like tone is everything. And that's why most of the time I'll text my husband something and I'm like, how can I phrase this different so that I'm not being an asshole right now? Like, how can I do this?
Right? No, it's so true. I will literally, like, every text I send, I go delete, and I'm like, no, let me add an exclamation mark or an emoji. No, hold on, I got to take that out. And that's why I'm even queen of, like, everyone who knows me knows I leave voice memos instead of text because I'm like, I overthink the text. It's just not my jam, the written word, the spoken word. I'm all about it.
Yes. So let's go to, like, being authentic, right? Like, your podcast, you talk very openly about the journey of becoming our better selves and tapping into astrology to do that. And so how do you kind of balance that? Or how did you come to balance that? Because obviously it's not like, switch, it's done. It's not like something you just automatically do. No. It's a journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, so authenticity, it's definitely been, I think, like, especially in the spiritual space, you kind of teach what you're trying to learn. That's why I always laugh. I'm like, don't ever put someone on a pedestal who's like a spiritual guru or a teacher. I'm like, if they're teaching about relationships, it's because they need to learn about relationships. If they're like teaching about manifesting money, it's because they got a broke ass mindset. And for me, being authentic and all things I teach about and having confidence and bad bitch energy and living in your purpose were all things that I was just like flailing and failing at, like for definitely, the first 30 years of my life. So I laugh. I'm like, I can't believe your age. I'm like, your age? I was just like, being like, what the hell is happening? And, I think I always felt certain parts of me were really important. My spirituality, my creativity, who I was. But then I would kind of go up against this feeling of like, ooh, I don't know if that makes me feel comfortable around me, or if I don't know if that's like socially acceptable, if that's going to make me money, or all these like stories of like all the programming got in. Like, I feel like I'm very open and I'm very empathetic. I'm very like, I also read like impressionable. So I feel like sometimes I was like, I feel really good about myself, but then I go out in the world and I'm just second guessing. I'm doubting. There's so much noise. So this journey of being authentic, whatever this means to you, to me just felt like, getting to quiet down some of that noise and going on this journey of building a relationship with getting to know you, yourself, first and foremost. Like, who am I? What are my strengths, my weaknesses, my opportunities, my obstacles, my superpowers, my shadow, and really like knowing yourself inside and out so no one can tell you anything that you're not, whether good or bad. Just like, nope. So knowing yourself and then learning like, okay, now what lights my heart up? What lights my soul up? How do I want to express that out in the world? And then what do I need as like my fuel to keep me going in that? My self-care, my self-regulating. And how do I also like own my shit when I become the toxic one? All these like fun questions that the spiritual journey takes you on. But this thing about authenticity, I loved it because instead of me I love options. I love doing a lot of things at once. But it was like for the first 30 years of my life, I was reading like 10 different maps and 20 different instruction manuals and 15 different people's scripts for my own life. And I just almost like froze. It was like paralyzing. Being authentic is like, okay, tuning in with yourself every day. What's working? What's not? What feels good? What lights me up? As long as it's not hurting anyone else or harming anyone else, chasing that and just owning it. And that is like, that's why I'm a big believer of like self-love, intuition, pleasure. These are things that are kind of like paths to our authentic self, tapping into them and like expressing them. And why I love astrology is sometimes you don't know, like, what are my strong suits? What are my weaknesses? And then you're like, oh, thank you, astrology, for just mapping it out in black and white. Okay, thank you. Wow, really like read for filth there. And that journey, why I'm a big believer of being like authenticity is important. Of course, like to me, it's magnetic. That's why I love like you. I found you from like your reels on Instagram. And I was like, it's magnetic. When someone's being authentic, to me, it's like vibrates. I had scroll past 100 Instagram accounts, people doing podcast work. But then it's just like, ooh, like something about that person, like, ooh, there's something there. It's like zing, ooh, electricity. So authenticity is so important if you're out there and you just want to be doing something and getting your message and your medicine out to people. But I also find like it's part of like harm reduction in the world and living in a more like inclusive and welcoming society. Because when you're being authentic to yourself, you're like, okay, like I can allow someone else to be their authentic self and not feel like I need to like control or fear or be like manipulated by like, oh, like it's like I'm just doing me and I feel good and my heart feels good and I feel at peace and I can go to sleep at night. And like you should have that too. Like spread your wings and fly. So authenticity is some of those things that's like so multi-layered to me. And thank you for asking me. That was really fun to kind of go on that journey with myself there.
Yes.
And that's what I mean about just talking and being like, oh, yeah, that's a lot to reflect on even for myself.
Yeah. Like, good to consider. Yeah. No, I love so many different parts of what you said because we talk a lot here. My message is always do what works for you. And so I recently had an episode, it was a bonus episode with my friend Lisa Zaratni, and we talked about how your mental health is more important than a podcast. Yeah. Your mental health is more important than being productive. She's a productivity coach. And like, you shouldn't put so much weight on the expectation to do something when it is to the detriment of your own mental health. Like, it makes absolutely no sense to me. And I'm like, guys, like, listen, don't do it. If you need to take a break from your podcast, do it. Right. It is okay.
Right. Like, it's not worth it. And then also back to that authenticity thing, when we're inauthentic, do you ever notice how immediately, like, the magic, the charm, the thing that razzmatazz that gets you in, like it's not there. Like when you do something and your heart's not in it and you're faking it or doing it from an empty cup, it like falls so flat, right? It's just like, yeah. So I'm like, yeah, just don't do it for a lot of reasons, but absolutely. I could not agree with that more.
Yeah. I love where you said like knowing yourself and understanding yourself, because I had one person ask, they're kind of a fly by the seat of their pants person and they're planning, and that's just how they like to plan. But their co-host was someone who wanted to plan ahead. And I was like, you have to do what works for you. If you try to strive and push against what works best for you, it is going to come from a place of inauthenticity, and it's going to come from a place of pushing and pushing and pushing. And like, I feel like this is something that we learn as we become more of ourselves, right? Of like, it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. Do what's working best for you. And it doesn't matter that this person is doing all these other things. If it's not what you want to do, it's not going to work out. And it's not even worth a waste of your time.
Literally. It's so true. It's just one of those things, like it's the biggest truths of life. And sometimes you have to like live through it and fail miserably at it to realize how important it is. But it's so true. And that's why I love, like, again, why I always speak to astrology. It just helps us give, like, we're in our own minds. We're in our own hearts. We're in our own experience. I have no idea that, like, oh, my experience is different from yours. That, to me, or someone's structure feels suffocating. And to someone else, it's like, of course, structure is everything. It's my safety. It's my stability. And then when you realize those things about yourself, you can be like, okay, now I know. Now I know what to ask for. I know what to advocate for, how to articulate it. And that's when we start to become, like, more like functioning, healthy versions of ourselves, because we're not trying to like play by someone else's rule book, right? And be like, yeah, it's so true.
Oh, I love it. So let's talk more about your podcast and your brand. Because I remember when you reached out to me in my DMs and I was like, who is this chick? Like, I mean, I'm all about astrology, but I just don't. I can only do so much research as an individual because I will research everything and that's all I will do.
We have a problem with it. Virgo, do not give us a little bait. We will take that to the end of the universe. That's why I have to be careful of what I get involved in. I totally agree. What I'm curious about.
Yes. It can be a bit debilitating sometimes, which is like, side note. So I'm writing a book. And it's not about podcasting. Okay. So guys, don't get excited. But I'm writing a book and I actually have a coach, like an accountability coach that I'm working with to keep me on task based on my personality. Because I want to research everything and do the fun stuff. And the book's never going to come out if I research the heck out of it. But she's like, so at what point would you like me to review the book? And I'm like, never. Let's just like never. I need to review this 50 more times before it goes to you.
On the neverth date of June 20 never would be great. Right. Oh my God. First of all, I just literally wrote down a note like accountability coach because I'm working on a book too. And I'm like, this is why I got to talk to my fellow mutable signs, my Virgos. I'm like, yeah, because that's it. I will research something to death. And then I have this like load of research around me. And I'm almost like, okay, now I don't even know where to start. Or it's like, it's too much. It's too much. That's why I found you. Get back to the DM, but that's why I knew you got to know yourself. And I know I'm like, if I try to do this podcast thing on my own, I will research it to death, and then I will sit on every episode and have it be like not perfect and not having it out in the world. And that's where like you changed the whole game for me. Like I could have never done a year of a podcast. What? I couldn't even do like 2 weeks of a podcast without you.
Because you tried to launch one before that, I believe, right?
Yeah, yes. It was that. It was just nothing. I mean, I had a podcast with a friend that was really fun, and we did it for like 3 months, and then just like nothing. Mm-hmm. And then we did a solo episode, and the podcast had a different name. It didn't have any structure, and also because of just me and my business partner, it was just a little bit in this vacuum. We both were like, man, not good. But we know a really big thing in life and in business is just knowing what you don't know and knowing where you have to hire someone. Because we also were like getting so tripped up with like the editing and like, what do we even need? Like what, a trailer? Like what even is that? Like, so we're like, let's just like let someone else guide us through this process and also hold us accountable. So yeah.
Yeah. That's where I thrive. Let me do the processes. Just hand it over to me and we'll have fun. Mm-hmm. That's all I need. Like,
absolutely.
That's good.
Absolutely.
It works. So your brand is pretty big. Kudos. First of all, like you have built it up over the last few years and it has been quite a journey, I'm sure. But you are and we've talked about authenticity and stuff, but like your brand online, you're able to kind of transition your listeners. And obviously this is a listeners to leads show. But I know one question that a lot of people have is like, how do I get people in my DMs? How do I get people to kind of take that next step from the conversation into my DMs and translating over to more of a one-on-one communication? And I think you do this so well. So in your authenticity, are like, hey, does this resonate? Send me a DM and tell me this story. Or tell, like, as you're sharing a story, you'll say, has this ever happened to you? Like, I want to know.
Yeah.
And how do you do that in a way? Because sometimes it can feel like, send me a DM. Okay, that's scary. I don't know what I'm doing. As you're kind of talking it out. So how do you do that in a way that feels good and kind of translates to taking your listeners on that journey to that next step of communicating with you?
Yeah, great question. And obviously, we're going to keep calling back to the authenticity. So what you said before about what feels good to you, like there's some stuff that feels so overwhelming and bad to me that I could never, I'm like, no. But what feels good to me is like, I'm nosy. I'm a nosy ass bee. That's why I do what I do. And so I love getting the tea from people. So I'm like, I legitimately, like, I'm not just saying this, like I literally want to hear about like, did you have a Mercury retrograde story? Or like, did you lose your temper last week? Like we talked about. So there's of course that one element of like, someone gave me a really great advice years ago, and I'm sure everyone who's listening has heard this in some capacity, but I'll just say it again. Like I used to get really nervous going on Instagram lives or YouTube videos or things because I would just be like trying to talk to this big, vast like audience in my mind. And, either like just like think about saying this to one person or like 5 people that you know. And because of like social media, I've gotten to connect with, and I have a community that we connect with a lot of people on the podcast on. So like I actually know who I'm talking to sometimes. I mean, obviously it does surprise me. Like I've had a few people who are like either celebrities, or I ran into someone in LA who's like, oh, I listened to your podcast. And I'm like, oh my God, like people listen to this. Like when I'm talking, I'm literally imagining talking to like my sisters, my best friends, and like 20 people I know in my community. And I'm like, oh, wow, like that's crazy that people are just, I don't know, are listening to this. It like still shocks me. But the thing of like, what do I want to hear from them? Like, how would I want to connect with them if this was a conversation, if we were just having like an overpriced latte and I'm spilling the tea on my thoughts on coaching, on astrology, whatever I'm talking about, finding a way of like, well, what do I want to hear back in the conversation now, right? So there's just that. So whatever anyone's podcast is on, if that's what you have a podcast on, chances are you're pretty passionate about it and you're curious about like, just like if you said it all to a friend at lunch, like what would you be like, what would be your takeaway? Like, hey, like, did this resonate? Like what's going on? So find something that feels authentic. And then I really do. I love like having fun. I love bringing things to life. I love watching people do things that are a little bit like outside of their comfort zone in the name of like connecting to their authentic self. So we've done a few like challenges or things to kind of get people in on the party. And I always feel like having a podcast or having a community is just like getting to throw a party. Like I don't think of a podcast as like, oh, it's all about me and I'm on the show and I'm the star of the show. I just think I'm a host of a party. Like, hey guys, here's the snacks. Here's the good playlist. Here's the vibe of the party. You two meet. You should talk about this. Here's a game. Here's a prompt. And now you guys all just talk amongst yourself. And that's what I think is really cool with the community element of a podcast, like having somewhere where people who all listen to you can like gather and share something and then connect with each other. That's why like social is such a great component. And like then they continue the conversation. And like those are the best parties. It's like, oh, they actually met in like a room and were talking about something. They bonded by the pool, like chit-chatting. Yeah, for you, like, okay, my podcast is like I'm hosting a party. Like, what do you want people to do? How do you want them to connect after? And how do you want to also like get information on like what they want to hear about again, right? Because like I know in the beginning I had a million ideas and it was just nice to hear from people by asking them those prompts and things like, oh, this is what's resonating with you. So I'm going to do more of that, right? Or it would help me like fine tune.
You put your heart and your soul into your show. And I want to help you reach all of those potential listeners out there. That's why I'm excited to announce my upcoming podcast marketing workshop. It's about giving you practical tools to grow your audience. You'll learn the secrets to getting your podcast discovered, attracting your dream listeners, and boosting those download numbers. This workshop will be hosted live with a replay available on April 30th. You can sign up by going to galatimedia.com/workshop. Let's grow our podcasts together. Yeah, and it allows you too to be able to continuously come up with more content, right? Because you're getting those questions and you're getting people in your DMs and like, hey, I have this question about this thing. It's like, there's a podcast episode idea.
There you go, right? Like there's literally my target audience, key demographic is giving me exactly what they want to hear. Like I don't have to overthink it. Yeah, perfect, right?
And it's easy for us, especially Virgos, to overthink what the content's going to be and how we're going to present it. And like, even though as external processors, it's easy to like articulate those thoughts, we can still tend to overthink it. Like I always have some type of bullet points going of like, these are the things I want to hit, but I know that I cannot script out my episode. If I got bullet points and I'll just, all right, we'll flow.
Flow. And then the bullet points are like the anchor to come back to. So you don't flow out into the ocean. You're like, okay, let me just find my buoy. Back to sea. And like, also I have tried and like everyone laughs, like everyone who works with me, I will write out scripts for things or I've done things with like a teleprompter that I literally wrote the script for. And I will still deviate from that because that's how insane I am. Like that I have a lot of weirdly rebellious energy in my chart. And I feel like I'm just like, no. Like I'm like, even though I wrote it.
No to past self.
Too much structure from past self. So that's why I am a big fan of bullet points.
I love that so much. But like You know yourself, right?
That's
and
part
so
of
it makes
knowing
it so
me.
much easier.
It's part of knowing myself, because that's the kind of stuff that drove me insane when I was like in high school and college. I'm like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I just do it? And I'm like, it's just not me. It ain't me, babe. So figure out a new workaround and then run with it.
Yes. Oh, so good. You have had some really fun success with your podcast. You hit charts every single week. You already have a big community. And this is something that I tell a lot of people is that you can't just launch a podcast and be like, thousands of downloads automatically. Like you spent years cultivating this community, but the podcast has allowed you to have an additional layer between people who kind of maybe find you on social media, then they get to know you more on the podcast, and then they join your group programs and your group memberships, and they get on there, they're like, I feel like I know you.
Yes, I love that.
Which I think is the whole point of a podcast that you're using for your business, is to take those people who get them to kind of get to know you, get to know your vibe, and it's almost a prerequisite to that next step of paying you money, because you can get people, and I know this has happened to you, where you've gotten people in your circle and you're like, they're not the right people.
No.
What's missing?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I think that there's just such a thing with like, again, back to authenticity, but there's something we're going through right now, and it's mirrored very much through astrology, but we're really like shifting away from business. It's just changing a lot. And obviously we saw social media like brought a lot of our people, like I wouldn't have a business without social media. Like I couldn't, I couldn't have a startup and do like media buying placements and magazines and radio ads back in the day. It's like, oh no, here I am on social media. Great. But a podcast, I feel like the two things that really helped me with it is that like, what do they say, that like no trust model of like to like get people coming back to you, and like that does that instantly for me. Again, I could not do that on blogs or social media posts. And I inherently, like, again, my weird inner rebel is like, I respect social media, but I don't want to like be owned by it. So I also am just like, forget it. Like I'm not like living my life. Like I just go dark on social media for like weeks at a time. I don't know. Not the best business advice. It's sometimes like, oh, like it just like, sometimes I get so like, oh, this just feels so curated and performative and like, or I just get overwhelmed. I'm just like, it's too much. Whereas the podcast like never feels that way, because it just feels like having this conversation with people I really value and admire and respect and want to like tell them some things. And exactly what you said, I feel like for years, what we do is kind of abstract. And even now we've had spirituality, astrology is having such a moment. People still are confused about what we do. But imagine when we started in like 2017, we're a spiritual wellness, but spiritual wellness brand. We're going to teach people about like crystals and astrology, and like people, we were in Manhattan and people were like, what? Like, what are you even saying, lady? And what? And like, how? And I'm going to make money doing this. And like, what? Do people even need this? This all feels really like woo woo and silly. But I was like, no. It's something there. And my business partner, Audrey, who always is such a good, like, pulling back and seeing things from a different perspective. She's like, once people meet you and they feel the vibe of what you're doing, they get it, and they're with us forever. And we have people who are still in our community who came to a Moon Circle event I did at a hotel, or like an event at Soho House we did, or a free pop-up we did with some brand. And so it's like, okay, well, how do we bring that experience? Only one person. And then of course, COVID happened, was like, really can't do the in-person events anymore. Yes. And that was like how we found people and like how they got to understand what we did. But everything, every block has a blessing. Every reroute has something like, it's like, hey, let's look at this from a different perspective. So the podcast, it was so cool. We used to get people to do like group classes with me or join our community, and they'd be a little bit like, why am I here? What's the deal? Or I don't know if I really like this person. Whereas now when we do like an onboarding of our community, we open up enrollment, or I have a one-on-one session with someone I don't know, or someone's like doing a consultation to mentor with me. They're like, hey, bitch, what's up? And they're like, hey, like, oh my God, like, honey, the universe brought us together. I love this, live for you. And I'm like, oh my God, like the difference after having the podcast for a few months and doing our first, it was like, and everyone was there. Talk about the magnetism of authenticity. Everyone, now we work with like tens of thousands of people, like everyone I interact with, I'm like, yeah, you're my kind of person. Like, you get it. Like, you have this big open heart, this crazy spirit. You have like socially justice minded. You're open, you're radical, you're witchy, but you're also like doing real stuff grounded in the earth, and you're freaking hilarious. And I'm like, there you go. Like, it just took away. So I'm like, doing a podcast, if that's your vibe and it feels good to you, it took away like so much of the headache of like, how do I find people and how do I find the right people, especially if you're doing anything that feels like not cookie cutter and not something where like, and something where you really want your personality to shine through. And especially as like female women identifying people, a lot of women are leading female, like founder-led brands, right? Like where the brand is important, but it's really like the personality, the mission, the heart and soul, right? Where it's like old way of doing business was like, here's this product, like buy it. Like, and now we're like, this is me and my life, and here's who I am. So for people doing anything in that way, I just think a podcast is like the absolute best tool, and like the networking that comes from it, and like the people you get to interview and people you get to talk to, and then you get to connect with people and find your exact like vibration, exact frequency of the right people. It's so beyond. It was such a game changer for me.
Yes. Oh man. What a note to end on. Hey
bitch. I was like, we're all in the party. I'm like, cool. Like, you guys got the party started without me, and I just joined it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so true though, because I remember meeting someone and her being like, I listened to your podcast. I can't wait to work together. I already know you. I already like you. Where do I sign? And I was like, where's my crown? Like, I felt like I needed a crown for a second. I was like, okay.
Right? It's such a different, it's that thing of like, don't chase, attract. You're like, you get to attract in people, and then they're already revved, rearing, ready to go, perfectly excited to work with you, versus you trying to like convince someone to work with you, right? It's like, yes. I love that. Get the
totally
crown
different energy.
Get the crown.
Oh, so good. So where can people find you, hang out with you, and maybe send you a DM and be like, I heard you on this podcast. Yes. We need to talk.
DM me. You know, I love it. Obviously, my personal Instagram, I'll start with that, at I am Madi Murphy. Again, like I just said, not super active, but active enough. And then, of course, if you're interested in all things like self-growth, step into your purpose, aligning with your highest and hottest self, you got to listen to CosmicRX Radio and find us at the CosmicRX. And we have a whole buttload of links there where you can join our community. You can get daily texts from us. And yeah, just like, but honestly, I do love a DM. I love a DM. And letting me know like what you think of me and what's going on. And I'm also a big fan of sending voice memos on DMs. Like I said, I hate texting. So yeah, come find me. Let's hang.
I love it. And we'll make sure that we have all the links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Madi.
Thank you, Alicia, for this, but like for everything. Hello. You are so wonderful at what you do. So thank you for sharing your magic with the world.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.